Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really tearing into a stack of sources that focus on, well, maybe the single most crucial act of leadership, but it's one that often gets ignored.
hmm
We're talking about the art of a perfect exit. Our sources actually call this the quiet exit, or sometimes, and I think this is quite beautiful, the sower's blessing. It's basically a roadmap for successful transition.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and we're usually conditioned to measure great leadership by like how much you build up, how long you stay, how tightly you manage
The
everything.
accumulation model.
Exactly. But the core paradox in this material just flips that script entirely. What if, it asks, what if the greatest act of leadership isn't in the building phase, but in the intelligent, powerful act of, well, letting go?
Releasing it.
Releasing it. The true measure of your legacy, these sources argue, is how effectively you step aside, making sure the mission outlasts your personal presence.
That's the key, isn't it? Ensuring it outlasts you.
So that's our mission today. We're going to unpack this roadmap, look at the emotional challenges, they call it, the heart work, and the concrete tools, the governance stuff leaders need to make sure their departure is actually a launch into the future, not some kind of slow, painful funeral for the organization.
And what's really fascinating is that this model, it isn't just some modern organizational theory. It actually has this profound ancient anchor.
Okay.
Well, the most enduring movements, they're never built on the grip of just one single leader. They're built on the strength of those founders who, really know how to entrust, how to commission, and then how to genuinely walk away with confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Our sources point directly to Paul. Remember when he was leaving the Ephesian elders? He commended them not to his future letters or some management structure he set up.
Right.
He commended them to God and the word of his grace. Acts 20.32. That kind of exit. That's empowerment distilled, really.
Okay, let's unpack that core paradox straight away because, yeah, it feels deeply counterintuitive.
It really does.
The source material sums it up, I think, perfectly in what they call the gardener's paradox. Success is measured by your redundancy. Why? I mean, in a world that idolizes indispensable leaders, why is becoming redundant the ultimate mark of success?
Well, it's because if you view your role through the lens of stewardship rather than ownership, the whole goal changes.
Stewardship versus ownership.
Exactly. If you own it, you feel you have to protect it forever, right? But if you steward it, your goal is actually to multiply its potential, making the whole system resilient, even when you're eventually absent.
Ah, okay.
Paul actually captures this perfectly. He says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. That's 1 Corinthians 3. The founder's job is the planting and the initial watering, creating the conditions for growth.
Right, setting things up.
But the focus has to shift, always, to the entity that transcends you. That's the God gave the growth part. If the work can't survive your absence or, if it crumbles 2 years after you leave, that doesn't show a lack of loyalty from the community. It actually proves you are maybe more like a proprietor who failed to build in that organizational resilience.
So redundancy isn't failure, it's proof of success.
In this context, absolutely. It signals maturity, sustainability.
And if we're looking for the deepest leadership blueprint for this, the sources bring up a concept that sounds maybe a bit abstract, but they say it's incredibly powerful. Kenosis. Can you translate that into practical terms for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Kenosis, it basically means self-emptying or relinquishing.
Okay.
It's this idea that true strength is found when you intentionally release authority for the sake of empowering others. And look, this isn't just some ancient religious idea. The sources frame it as a blueprint for modern leadership succession.
How so?
Well, the leader's power is used not to fill every single void, but actually to intentionally create voids for others to step into. Think of Moses, right? He made sure Joshua was commissioned publicly, very clearly, before his own departure.
Yeah, okay.
Or Jesus, setting up the Great Commission right after his ascension. Departure, in this view, is often the catalyst for multiplication. It's part of what the sources call God's leadership economy.
But, okay, the theory sounds good. It's much easier than the practice, though, right?
Always.
Letting go of something you poured your life into, maybe your whole identity is wrapped up in it, that feels incredibly risky. Scary, even.
Yep.
We can draft all the transition plans we want, but the sources are spot on. The hardest part is that heart work.
That really is the immovable barrier sometimes.
Yeah.
For the leader who's departing, that emotional landscape, their interior world, it's incredibly complex.
What kind of things come up?
Well, layers of fear. First, there's the fear of just becoming irrelevant. What happens when the emails stop flooding in, the phone stops ringing?
Yeah, the silence.
Exactly. Second, there's real grief. You're mourning years of sacrifice, deep relationships you've built, and the loss of a role that often defined who you are.
Hmm.
And finally, there's the shadow of pride. That temptation to believe deep down that only I have the unique insight, or only I have the gifting needed to keep this legacy going.
Ah, the indispensable feeling again.
Yes. And that pride, that's the engine that drives the we call shadow leadership later on.
And okay, if the founder is feeling all that internal pressure, the community must be feeling its own anxieties too, right? It's not happening in a vacuum.
Absolutely not. They often fear abandonment. They worry about continuity.
Yeah.
Will we drift without our anchor? Will the new team start fighting and the whole thing spirals out of control?
That makes sense. So what's the antidote?
Well, this is why the antidote isn't just paperwork, it's profound trust. But critically, trust has to be built. It's not just granted automatically.
Built how?
The sources detail 3 pillars that are necessary to stabilize the exit. First, relational trust that comes from personal integrity, vulnerability from the founder over time. Second, structural trust, things like clear governance, financial transparency that's been tested and proven.
Right, the system.
And third, theological trust, this shared conviction that ultimately God's mission is sovereign, not the founder's personal brilliance. When you establish that kind of 3-legged stool of trust, the community's fear of abandonment starts to subside.
Okay, that shifts the conversation then. If the heart is, let's say, getting ready and trust is being built, the next fear is probably organizational chaos during the handover itself.
Precisely.
And that's why the sources pivot immediately to the need for a pretty rigid phased map. The quiet exit, as we said, isn't just a date on the calendar, it's a process, usually 12 to 36 months.
Yeah, that phasing is crucial for stability. We can actually stick with that garden metaphor through the 4 main phases they outline.
Okay, phase 1.
1, incubation rooting. This should really start from day 1 of the organization's life, ideally. It's about establishing a clear vision and identifying potential local leaders really early on, just asking who looks like the next generation.
So succession planning from the get-go.
Yeah. Essentially, yes. Phase 2, equipping grafting. This is where intentional skills transfer happens through rigorous apprenticeship plans.
Yeah.
It means daily shadowing, delegating real responsibility, embedding core practices. You're actively attaching new leaders to the main vine, so to speak.
Got it. Grafting them in.
Phase 3, shared leadership mulching. This is where the founder really needs to step back, maybe become more of a facilitator. Operational teams, theological teams if applicable, they gain a local majority. They start practicing shared decision-making. You're basically taking the training wheels off.
Okay, letting them steer.
Letting them steer, letting them handle most of the falls even. And finally, phase 4, transition of authority harvesting. This is the final stage. It involves that public commissioning we talked about and the full legal transfer of authority.
What's great about this framework is that it feels measurable. It's not just based on, gut feeling.
Right.
To avoid that disaster scenario of leaving too early, the source material insists on concrete readiness indicators.
Yeah.
What are the absolute non-negotiables there?
Yeah, you can't just schedule the departure based on a whim or when the founder feels like it. It has to be based on evidence.
Yeah.
3 key indicators must be met.
Okay, number 1.
First, local leadership capacity. The local team must demonstrate they can teach, counsel, lead worship, or handle core organizational functions without depending on the founder daily. If every tough pastoral issue or tricky HR problem still lands on the founder's desk, they aren't ready.
Makes sense. Dependency check. What's second?
Second, financial sustainability. The organization needs diverse local giving. The sources suggest a range, maybe 50 to 80% of the operating budget should be covered by local funding within a specific time frame, usually 2 to 4 years. But it depends on the context.
Now, that 50-80% mark, that sounds incredibly ambitious, maybe even rigid, especially for organizations maybe working in really difficult economic contexts. Do the sources offer any flexibility there, or is it a hard rule?
That's a fair question.
Yeah.
It is context dependent, and that's sort of the escape clause. The main point isn't the exact percentage number itself. It's more about the diversity and the local ownership of the funding stream. If, say, 100% of your budget comes from one single outside source, well, that's just not sustainable long-term, is it?
Right. It's fragile.
Exactly. So the metric is really measuring whether the local community values the mission enough to actually sacrifice for it financially.
Yeah.
That's the underlying piece.
Okay, that clarifies it. And the third indicator?
And the third is governance and conflict paths. You need clear roles defined, but maybe even more importantly, you need tested and trusted processes for resolving disputes before the founder leaves.
Tested and trusted.
Yes, because the founder is often the accidental default mediator, right? You have to prove the system can handle conflict without relying on that central figure stepping in all the time.
Okay, let's talk execution tools for a second. To manage that complex shift in responsibilities, the sources recommend something called the RCI roles matrix. Now, we've heard that term in business contexts. Why is it so essential for a leadership handoff like this?
Because probably the chief stressor during any transition is ambiguity. Who actually gets to make the call now?
Right, who has the final say?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The RACI matrix defines who is responsible. That's the person doing the work. Who is accountable? The one who approves the work holds the ultimate decision power. Who needs to be consulted? They provide input. And who just needs to be informed, kept in the loop.
Okay.
When the founder leaves, the accountability, in critical areas like finance or maybe theology or HR, it must switch immediately and clearly from the founder to the successor. RACI makes that shift crystal clear, visible to everyone. It helps eliminate the successor's fear that the founder might just swoop back in and unilaterally override them.
That level of clarity seems crucial. And it brings us to maybe the most public and perhaps fragile moment, the ritual of release, that public commissioning service you mentioned. Why can't we just handle this with, I don't know, an email and some HR paperwork? Why does the symbolic act matter so much, especially for the community?
Ritual is absolutely vital here because it makes that internal shift. The letting go, the receiving of authority, it makes it communal, public, and in this particular context, holy.
Oh.
It provides essential psychological closure for everyone involved. If the departure is just quiet or purely administrative, the community never really knows how to emotionally process the change. And frankly, the founder is never truly perceived as having gone.
So what makes a good ritual? What are the essential elements?
Well, the sources say a commissioning liturgy needs a few key things to ensure permanence. You almost certainly need a laying on of hands or some equivalent symbolic blessing that publicly transfers that spiritual or organizational weight.
Okay, a clear symbolic transfer.
Yes, and a symbolic transfer of objects is usually needed to maybe handing over the actual keys or a strategic plan document or even planting a sapling together with the new team, something tangible.
Right.
And critically, the public signing of a written transition covenant. This makes the transfer of authority spiritual, emotional, and administrative, all at the same time, witnessed by the community.
And right after that ritual comes the concept designed to prevent, as you said, the single greatest danger to the successor, shadow leadership.
Mm-hmm.
This is the wise margin for post-transition support. This sounds like where the framework gets really strict.
It is, and it absolutely has to be. The wise margin covenant is strictly defined, strictly enforced, precisely because the founder's ongoing presence, no matter how well-intentioned, can easily smother the new leadership.
It sounds almost brutal, though. I mean, the covenant apparently mandates the founder serves only in a defined advisory capacity, like consultation by invitation only, and sets a strict meeting cap, maybe only 4 advisory meetings a year.
That's often the recommendation, yes.
And it explicitly states no signatory authority, no unilateral decision-making power for the founder. What if, some sudden legal crisis blows up 2 weeks after the transition, and the successor genuinely needs the founder's deep institutional history? Does this framework risk crippling the organization with its rigidity right when it's most vulnerable?
Look, it does carry that risk, yes. But the sources argue pretty strongly that the risk of shadow leadership undermining the new leader is actually far greater and more common than the risk of a temporary crisis that only the founder could solve.
Okay, so it's a calculated risk.
It is. And if the founder keeps signatory authority or the power to override decisions, the new leader effectively has no real agency. They'll always be viewed, and probably view themselves, as just temporary or acting on behalf of.
So how do you safeguard against genuine, unforeseen crises needing that historical input?
Well, the safeguard is sort of twofold. First, that whole preparation period, the 12 to 36 months, that should ideally identify and resolve most foreseeable legal or governance weaknesses beforehand. That's the point of the readiness indicators.
Really, the prep work.
And second, the covenant itself must include a specific clause for mediation. It should name a neutral external coach or mediator who can step in if serious conflicts arise, or if the new leadership formally requests specific extraordinary advisory input from the founder that goes beyond the agreed-upon cap.
Ah, so there's an emergency valve, but the new leadership controls it.
Exactly. It protects the successor's agency while still ensuring wisdom remains accessible if truly needed.
And what about sealing the deal administratively? The sources seem to highlight an almost aggressive speed required right after the ritual.
Yes, the clock starts ticking the moment that covenant is signed publicly. The sources really emphasize completing all the legal and financial steps, things like transferring website domain ownership, changing bank signatories, handing over all organizational passwords within, say, 72 hours of that public ritual.
72 hours, that's fast.
It is fast.
Yeah.
But that administrative speed is what seals the commitment. It transforms a symbolic promise into an irreversible reality on the ground. It physically prevents the founder from having any practical levers of control left, even accidentally. That guarantees the integrity of the release.
Wow. Well, this has been an incredibly thorough deep dive. It really shows that this quiet exit, it's a synchronized effort, isn't it, between emotional health, theological conviction, and some pretty rigid practical governance.
Exactly right. Success really lies in that disciplined departure. It has to be based on the theology, stewardship, kenosis, on the strategy that phased handover, the readiness indicators, and on the commitment, the written covenant, and that absolutely necessary wise margin.
So for you listening, now that you're absorbing this framework, the sources actually recommend you don't just wait for some official start date to pop up on the calendar.
No, don't wait.
They suggest taking action now with what they call the 30-day starter steps just to build momentum.
Yeah, simple things like identify maybe 2 to 4 potential apprentices today. Just start thinking about it. Begin some intentional formation with them, even informally. Start drafting what that wise margin covenant might look like for your context.
And maybe make one small, symbolic administrative move.
Exactly. Transfer one minor administrative control right now, a specific software login, maybe a small recurring task. Hand it over completely to a local leader. Just start small, build the muscle.
It really does flip the script, doesn't it? The idea that the greatest act of leadership might actually be the most powerful act of releasing control. It requires, I think, a radical shift in perspective.
Yep.
Away from self-importance towards, well, selfless service.
The sower's blessing.
The sower's blessing. So here's the final thought for you to mull over. If your greatest contribution isn't actually found in what you accomplish personally, but in what continues vibrant and independent long after you're gone, what assumptions about control, about influence, do you maybe need to start dismantling today to truly embrace that sower's joy?